The next piece we're going to be talking about is Diego Rivera, and specifically we're looking at Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Alameda Central Park. And I'm going to give a bit of background on the Muralist movement. I think it's really important to talk about that before we even delve into the mural. So I had mentioned the Mexican Revolution that I had said ends either, depending on who you're reading, they'll say 1917 or 1921. But we have right, the Mexican Revolution, in which they were seeking equal access of education, equal distribution of land, and things like that, right? Equal distribution of wealth, right? We had very, very divided social classes and very limited access to just about anything if you were not from the wealthy class. And so right after the revolution, we have a group of intellectuals who are trying to figure out who we are as Mexicans. And within this group, we have, great, I'm totally blanking on Jose Vasconcelos' name, but I didn't. We have Jose Vasconcelos, who is hired as the Minister of Education or Public Instruction, and he hires muralists to come to Mexico to paint didactic murals. The most famous of the muralists, and I just want to point out, there's a whole army of muralists painting throughout all of Mexico. We usually only focus on Los Tres Grandes, or the Three Greats, and we usually only discuss Mexico City. But just so that you know, there was a lot more going on. Does anyone in the class know who the Tres Grandes were? Orozco, Rivera, y Siqueiros.
How do you spell the last
S-I-Q-U-I-E-R-O-S. And so we have these three muralists that are very popular at the time. Possibly the most popular and the one with the biggest ego of them all would be Diego Rivera. And within their murals, they're retelling a history of Mexico that had long been oppressed. They're rediscovering their historic indigenous roots. This also coincides with many archaeological digs. So we're actually having the past literally being dug out at around this time, and these artists are actually looking at these objects for inspiration. A lot of the muralists will actually also be traveling throughout Mexico to learn more about the different customs and people from the regions. And it is something they will be representing in their murals. If you look at the murals, you'll notice, of course, you'd need to know a little bit about the history to be able to identify, but you'll notice different regional costumes and customs being represented in a lot of these murals. The murals, of course, were being painted on public buildings, right? Making art accessible to the public. A lot of them condemn easel painting. Why would they condemn easel painting? Class.
And it's exclusive. It's elitist.
It's mostly, yes, it is European, but it's because it's elitist. Right, and when you have a painting, it's usually hung in an interior, and it's accessible to a very limited amount of people, accessible both economically but also to see it visually, right? Whereas a mural painted on a public site is accessible to everyone. And so they're pushing forth their political agenda, they're trying to educate people about their history and customs and culture. And they're also promoting literacy and education programs through these murals. Other countries will have similar programs inspired by Mexico. We'll have the New Deal here in the United States, having smaller scaled mural projects, but we will have them. And a lot of muralists in the 40s and 50s will be moving back and forth between Mexico and mainly New York. But of course, we know we have the really famous Detroit murals. But New York will be a point in which New York and California actually will be points in which we'll have a lot of this back and forth going on between Mexico and the United States. Actually, it's usually the Mexican artists moving back and forth.
Just, again, some of you may know this, but when you say looking back at Mexican history that might have been repressed or erased, are they interested in going back 100 years, or are they interested in going back 3,000 years?
Okay, thanks for the question. So they're looking back at Aztec and Mayan history. We'll be looking a lot of iconography being pulled from that language. So we'll be seeing plumed serpents, for example, jaguars being used. We have a plumed serpent in here. And jaguars being brought in. So not so much their European colonial history. They will see that as the catalyst for bad things happening to Mexicans. But a lot of these mural cycles, like this one, and it's a lot, so I'm not really going to go into the detail, but let me project a better copy of it. So I found, again, thanks to Flickr, I wanted you to see the scale. So that's why I was trying to find someone. But this is the scale. So it's just so that you can see the size of the mural.
Where is this work again?
It's in, it's in a hotel.
In Mexico City.
Yes, it was a commissioned piece. Do I have the name of the hotel? I didn't write it. Did I have it in the first one, right? There we go. So it was originally in the hotel, yes. In the Hotel del Prado, it was a commissioned piece. And
Has it been moved?
it's been moved now. It's in a museum. In Mexico. Yes, it's still in Mexico. Sorry. Okay, sorry. So I think the hotel doesn't exist anymore, and that's why it got moved. So it got rescued, and it's now in a museum.
But are they on canvas where they can rescue them, or some of them right on the built fresco?
They make them both ways. So some of them will be painted on the wall. Some of them will be in a fresco style. Some of them will not be in a fresco style. Some of them will just be a paint on.
So they may have taken this and run out of the wall. It could have been on the wall, but they could have transferred
But-
the whole
But some of them are what are known as portable murals. So those will be made on canvas or on board, and that you can move in. MoMA has several portable murals by Diego Rivera. Several.
Does the word Prado mean something in Spanish? Is this a Hotel del Prado, and I'm just thinking of the Prado Museum? Does it mean?
I mean, it's just probably makes you think of luxury or something like that. But
Does it
no, that's
mean
just the hotel
something?
name.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So there were different types of murals. And eventually they'll even make, well, at the UNAM they'll have some that are made even out of tin because they're experimenting. So here we see a history of Mexico being portrayed. We see the revolution and peasants. What's usually the best known portion of this mural is the central part. It would be this close up here. And that's what's usually reproduced and discussed. However, the corners shouldn't be ignored. They do have to connect back to the history, so it goes all the way from pre-Columbian to present to lead us to the center, where we have several known characters, but I'm going to focus on just 3 of them. We have a child, Diego Rivera, a very young Diego Rivera, holding the hand of La Calavera Catrina, and we have a full-bodied Catrina standing next to him. And then kind of in between behind them is a Frida Kahlo holding a yin-yang sign, which is kind of odd, but that's how he decided to
What's behind them? Frida, did you say?
Oh.
Frida, I see Frida.
Yeah, Frida Kahlo.
That's a photograph. There's a photograph of her.
Yeah.
outfit also.
Yeah, so we have the child, Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, and Katrina.
Can you tell what Frida's holding?
She's holding a yin yang.
Yeah. What,
Yin yang.
Yin yang. Oh,
Yeah, yin yang.
Yin yang, got it.
Yeah, I said it too fast. A yin yang.
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh yeah, I'll talk about her. That's why I brought her in. She's a quite popular, famous lady. So, La Catrina. Catrina is used is a term that's used to refer, or used to be used to refer to upper class women, and she is popularized by José Guadalupe Posada, who was a printmaker illustrator at Mexico in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Posada, some of you have probably seen his caraveras around. They're pretty popular. His work was disseminated mostly through penny press, right, through cheap publications. Illustration at the time is really important because illiteracy is very high, right? So we learn through looking at drawings. And his work is very, very popular. It's humorous. It's slightly crude. It's fun.
Maria Del Mar,
Yes.
You know where I've seen that image is Day of the Dead.
Yeah, well, so we think about the calaveras and we associate them, right? The skulls, the sugar skulls with the Day of the Dead. And in the case of in Mexican culture, their relationship with death is not the same as we tend to have in the U.S., right? In the U.S., we seem to be kind of more afraid of it. It's more taboo. We're not as open to it. Whereas in Mexico, it's just seen as a natural part of life, right? And there's a lot of respect for your elders and your ancestors, and even visiting a cemetery and leaving little relics, gifts for your ancestors it's such a different relationship from here. I go maybe once a year if I'm visiting my parents, where in Mexican culture there are a lot of times in which people will visit and they'll leave food and gifts. For kids, I've seen kids, right, they'll leave little toys and balloons and candy if it's a dead child. And so we have this relation. Yes, we associate it a lot with the Day of the Dead because we're more familiar with that here in the US. There's also a certain type of humor about death, right? You can't avoid death, so we kind of shouldn't be afraid of it and just kind of embrace it and be humorous about it.
So that's what she kind of represents, is this
This,
embracing of death.
I mean, everybody's gonna die, even upper class women, right? We're all gonna die. And he shows like the different classes, so you'll see his calaveras will have, like you can tell some of them because of what they're wearing, because they're clothed, will be upper and lower class, and in the end we're all the same, is kind of one of his running comments.
So is it like saying we all put our shoes on one at a time? I mean, is it
I-
like that?
I guess.
That's equality?
Yeah.
That makes us all equal?
Yeah, we're all the same, yeah.
Is
We-
it makeup on the face? Like the lips,
On her, no,
Fat lips? No.
no. Oh, this one does have like red lips, but the Posada one doesn't. I thought you were asking about the Posada. So in the larger mural, let me just go back to it real quick.
Before you
doing-
leave that slide,
Oh,
is there any significance for the gentleman that she has, that's right next to her here on our right?
this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the big mural because I'm going to talk about the figures in general, because otherwise we would take a whole class going over the who's who, and off the top of my head I'll be able to pick out a couple, but not all of them. So in the mural in general, we're seeing a span of 400 years of Mexican history being painted. This is a fairly common theme within the muralists. They will paint a history of Mexico. So it'll go pre-Columbian to present. Usually, it's very critical of the colonial period, usually. It'll show you abuse of power of the Europeans, and then right before, and then it'll continue showing this abuse of power under the Porfiriato, right, in which the local upper class continues to abuse the indigenous or the mixed population. So they're very critical. Ironically, a lot of these artists are coming out of this class, so it's very contradictory. Another thing that I didn't mention, but I should mention, is they're diehard communists.
Yes.
Diehard communists. The artists are. And so they'll write a manifesto in which they talk about the death of easel painting, and how monumental, I guess, public art should be accessible to everybody. They also, the way they style themselves. So when we talked about Frida Kahlo, we talked about how she dresses up as an indigenous woman. The male artists, very much in a line of thinking of the Soviets, will be wearing overalls. They do not think there's a distinction between any kind of worker, so they, as painters, are equals to a mechanic or a factory worker or a carpenter. And so here we don't see it because he's showing himself as a younger upper class child, which is what he was. But when you see him portraying in photos of himself or in self-portraits, he'll usually be wearing denim or overalls, right? Denim at the time being associated with workers' clothes, although now it's trendy and cool, as we can see that. Diego Rivera, though, his communism is very contradictory, right? He accepted large commissions of well-known capitalists in the United States, which eventually led for him being kicked out of the Communist Party in Mexico for not being a true communist. I mean, if you really are a communist, why are you taking money from a Rockefeller? He is the devil. And they actually do paint them as devils in some of these paintings, which are kind of hilarious. Let me see if I'm forgetting anything. We're seeing the Alameda Central Park is, which is where they're being depicted at, right? Is Mexico City's largest park. Parks are something that are interesting. Now we think of parks as accessible to everyone, but at one time parks used to be limited to upper classes. And so here we're seeing 400 years of Mexican history gathering through, it's kind of a motley crew of a stroll, right? It just doesn't make any sense, but they're kind of strolling, all hanging out at the park at the same time.
So you're saying it represents several different eras,
Yes.
right? And so can we then say maybe several different social classes, or are they just very distinct?
Yes. No, we actually have workers and lower class people that we can easily see here. I hope you guys get a really good quality image of this, because this was the best one I could find. The one I pulled from the internet, as you can see, is getting really pixelated by blowing it up. Oh, sorry. But we're seeing so here we're seeing, right, different classes. Everybody's dressed, I guess, impeccably within their class as best they can. We see very beautiful colorful balloons.
So is this
I'm trying to think if there's
commissioned
any.
by the city or commissioned by the hotel?
This was commissioned at the time by the hotel. Again, kind of contradictory in this whole, like, I'm a communist, equal for everyone, right? Because it's being made in a hotel.
Yeah.
Also, this death to the easel painting is again another kind of contradictory thing because they all, as painters, continued practicing easel painting. But at the time, the two most popular forms of art within this group of artists was muralism and printmaking. Printmaking associated with mass production, circulation, cheap, right, accessible work, which is one of the reasons I got into studying printmaking. I'm just really fascinated with that.
Does the history read like in a linear way across the mural, or do you kind of have to?
It's reading.
recognize
It's sweeping into the middle.
the middle?
hmm
Something like
So here we're seeing big sombreros, which we kind of associate with figures such as Pancho Villa. So this is probably the Mexican Revolution. I'm just trying to. I'm curious as to why this piece, though, because there are other pieces that I would have.
Why do you suppose he painted himself as a child?
I've actually read several different interpretations.
In a sense, he was a child of XYZ, therefore.
So I've actually read several interpretations as of why he's portraying himself as a child. Of course, again, art history, there's no single right answer. One interpretation that I read was that at the time he was painting this, he was feeling very helpless about his relationship with Frida Kahlo. Another interpretation that I've read is that this was that he was close in age, so this is like reminding him of like when he would visit this as a kid. So Frida Kahlo died in 54. This is painted in 47. So she was going through some really hard health problems, and so, like I said, different interpretations. One, he felt like a hopeless child because he couldn't do anything for her health, and another one is kind of a nostalgia throwback to his childhood memories of the park. Do you have?
I drew the picture of the
Oh, the Katrina, isn't she beautiful? And then she has the feathered, right, the plumed serpent, making reference to pre-Columbian history and mythology. So there's all these little items that we could kind of nitpick through. I'm just curious why this and not like, I would have chosen the Ministry of Education murals. I'm not sure why this one.
So if you're a Mexican kid looking at this, would you like understand the history of it all?
A Mexican person will.
Okay.
So that's another thing that's really interesting. For us, it takes us a couple minutes, maybe more, to figure out who everybody is and where they stand. But there's a lot of sense of pride in national history and culture. And somebody local could break it down really quickly.
Consider this nationalistic?
Oh, yes. All of the muralists, all the projects made by the muralists were highly nationalistic. There's a specific political propaganda that they're pushing at this time, and they're all working towards it. At times it might be contradictory. Sometimes they'll find themselves at odds. But there's this trying to create a sense of nationalism for all of us that is equal going through it.
Would the Ministry of Education commissions be comparable to the WPA in the United States? Like, where in the New Deal, the government recognizes people are out of jobs, we're going to give you money to make art? Or is it more like a propaganda?
I would say, well, the New Deal is inspired by this, definitely. I think the New Deal projects, the muralists, the murals were inspired by these. I think the New Deal was a much larger scale project than the muralist project was.
That's cool, I didn't realize that.
But there are overlaps.
So when you say it's inspired by, so this predates.
This
So
predates.
like the 30s when we begin to see a lot of murals.
Well, we're This is a later piece that we're looking at, but the Mexican muralist movement starts in the 20s.
Oh, okay.
How much control did the artists have over the content?
A lot. Yeah. I don't think they were, I think they were told there's a specific type of agenda that we want. But I don't, that I know of, I don't think they were told this is the only subject matter you can paint on.
You know, in the Western view of art, this came in not so much on its own. I think merit as it did, this influenced Jackson Pollock. You know, Jackson Pollock had a chance to see the muralists using paint that was car paint or whatever paint, painting on a huge scale, you know, and all of that is seen as influencing his media, his scale.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to Mexican muralists as their own moment style.
Oh yeah, in the US we don't usually, yeah, I mean this isn't really spoken about. Sometimes people do talk about the Rockefeller, the demolishing the murals at the Rockefeller Center, but that's kind of it. A lot of these artists, not Rivera, but some of the other ones were actually using more industrial car type paints to create these, experimenting. So the parallel that I wanted to draw, going back to the question between New Deal and the Muralist project, I mean, we usually talk about it as the Muralist project, but it's not the only thing that is going on at the time. There is this desire to rediscover and document Mexico's past and Mexico's culture and people. It's a contradictory situation because they also see the indigenous person as nostalgic, but also as an illiterate person who basically cannot be fixed. Some scholars have written about the Indian problem in Mexico at the time. So they're trying to save them, rescue them, nostalgically, symbolically, but in reality, they're really trying to, I guess, westernize them. And it becomes a very contradictory agenda of what's going on. And Mary Coffey specifically has written about this. She's an art historian who's out at Dartmouth right now.
How do you spell her last name?
Coffey, Coffey.
Oh.
Mary Coffey. And so in Mexico, we are seeing this documentation that the New Deal project was doing. New Deal is employing artists, so we usually talk about the artist portion, but they also hired a lot of historians and anthropologists to record music and photograph and to just take notes of customs that they thought were getting lost or would be lost. And this is actually happening in territories, in US territories as well, but that's another class. But Puerto Rico's doing it too.
And in American Samoa.
And yeah, so the US territories we're getting, yeah. And the Virgin Islands we're getting photographed as well. And like I said, this is a whole different side project that we could go into. But little armies of people were being sent to document this. Any questions about this piece? Because we have two more. So I feel like I'm going to run through this one. Okay.